8. Edgar La Barbie Valdez Villarreal. Nicknamed La Barbie for his fair complexion and blue eyes, Edgar Valdez Villarreal was born and raised in the border city of Laredo, Texas. He became a drug dealer in high school, turning down his father's offer to pay for college, and fled to Mexico after becoming wanted by law enforcement. During his time there, he began working for the Beltran-Leyva Cartel. His connections with the US helped him gain seniority, and he eventually became a top-ranking lieutenant. Villarreal also led a violent enforcement gang called Los Negros, which helped maintain the cartel's foothold in the Nuevo Laredo region during a territorial dispute with rival syndicate Los Zetas. But his leadership was challenged following the death of the cartel's leader, Arturo Beltran-Leyva, in 2009, resulting in the organization becoming fragmented. Law enforcement finally captured Villarreal in 2010 following a years-long manhunt across 5 Mexican states. He was extradited to the US and was sentenced to 49 years in federal prison for cocaine trafficking and money laundering charges. In November 2022, Villarreal was listed as no longer being in the custody of the US Bureau of Prisons, sparking fears that he'd either escaped or had cut a deal and gone into witness protection. Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador demanded an explanation from the Biden administration. No explanation was given, but Villarreal was listed as back in custody as of February 2023. A BOP spokesperson told the Daily Mail that there are several reasons why a prisoner may be listed as not in custody, including for court hearings and to receive medical treatment. The reasons for Villarreal's hiatus from maximum security prison remain unclear. 7. Ernesto El Neto Pinon de la Cruz. Ernesto El Neto Pinon de la Cruz began his criminal career as a youth in the Mexican border city of Ciudad Juárez. He was just 20 years old when he was arrested in 2009 in connection with 30 kidnappings in the state of Chihuahua, including the abduction of a judge. And while serving a 224-year sentence at Cerezo No. 3 State Prison in Juarez, Pinon became the leader of the notorious Los Mexicles, a street and prison gang with a history of connections with the Sinaloa Cartel and the US-based Gulf Cartel. Boasting around 14,000 members, the gang acted as an armed wing of both organizations. After the infamous drug lord Joaquin El Chapo Guzman was sentenced to life in the US in 2019, the Sinaloa cartel split. The Los Mexicles loyalty fell with the Gamboa cartel, led by a former associate of El Chapo. Authorities believe that El Neto ordered a string of at least 10 killings from behind bars in August 2022, on a day that infamously became known as Black Thursday. On New Year's Day in 2023, members of Los Mexicles arrived at the prison in armored cars and opened fire on the guards. They made their way inside and released at least 30 inmates, one of which happened to be El Neto. At least 19 people died, including 10 guards, 7 inmates, and 2 gunmen. 4 days after the breakout, Pinon was killed in a shootout with police in central Juarez. A gruesome photo of his handcuffed body lying face up in a truck bed was leaked by the press, highlighting the grim realities of the cartel lifestyle. 6. Victor Manuel Elvic Felix Beltran. Victor Manuel Elvic Felix Beltran is the son of Mexican drug trafficker Victor El Señor Felix, who was a high-ranking member of the Sinaloa cartel under the leadership of Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. Beltran took over his father's duties as the cartel's chief financial officer following the 2011 arrest of Felix. In 2009, Beltran was indicted on federal drug conspiracy and money laundering charges in Chicago. But his arrest didn't come until 8 years later, in 2017. The 32-year-old was awaiting extradition to the US in early 2020 when he and 2 other alleged cartel members, Luis Fernando Meza Gonzalez and Yael Osuna Navarro, escaped from the South Men's Preventative Prison in Mexico City. It's unclear how they escaped, but the trio were discovered missing during a morning head count. Mexican officials said that city jails aren't appropriate locations for high-ranking cartel members who use their far-reaching connections to get transferred to these lower security facilities. A manhunt was launched, but there's been no updates on the escapees' whereabouts in the years since, indicating that they're still at large. 5. Juan Matamba Castro. Better known by his alias Matamba, Juan Castro led a Colombian drug trafficking gang called Cordillera Sur, which moved up to 20% of the cocaine shipments that came out of the country's Nariño province. With corrupt, high-ranking military members on its payroll, the gang received warnings about impending raids and enjoyed the added benefit of having its crooked allies target rival gangs. Castro was arrested dozens of times throughout his drug trafficking career, but he escaped more than once, including in 2018 when he faked his own death while on medical leave from prison. By the time he was captured, he was living under a different name and had undergone plastic surgery to change his appearance. Castro's final arrest came in May of 2021, and his final escape attempt came 10 months later in March of 2022. Security footage showed the 41-year-old casually exiting the maximum security La Picota jail in Bogota wearing a guard's uniform. He passed through numerous corridors and security doors, seemingly without any guards present, and calmly walked out of the building and into the free world. The guard, who was suspected of giving Castro a uniform and leaving his cell door ajar, was suspended, along with 55 others who were on shift at the time, and the prison's director. Castro allegedly bribed staff members to the tune of $5 million to help facilitate his escape. 2 months later, military police killed Castro in the northeastern countryside town of Bolivar during a joint operation with the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration. The top wanted fugitive was sitting outside a hut reading a book with his bodyguard nearby when the raid occurred. Castro's bodyguard fled on a motorcycle, leaving him on his own to handle the situation. Instead of surrendering peacefully, he responded with gunfire, sparking a shootout with authorities which ultimately left him dead. Following Castro's escape, Colombian President Iván Duque announced a full reform of the country's prison system to prevent a similar incident from happening in the future. 4. Gonzalo Lopez. Texas-born career criminal Gonzalo Lopez had a violent criminal history dating back to 1994. His first murder came in 2005 when he was working for the La Mana drug cartel based in the Mexican state of Tamaulipas. Acting under orders from the organization's leader, Juan Lerma, Lopez and a man known only as Rick abducted 37-year-old Jose Guadalupe Ramirez from his home in Weslaco, Texas, and held him for ransom. Ramirez had supposedly failed to repay the cartel for fronting him with $40,000 worth of cocaine and marijuana. His family turned over vehicles, drugs, and money to his captors in hopes of securing his safe return, but instead, the kidnappers bludgeoned him to death. Lopez was sentenced to life in prison for killing Ramirez and a police officer. And while being transported to a medical appointment in 2022, he broke out of his restraints and cut his way out of a cage using a homemade knife and key, while other inmates distracted the driver and an officer who was riding along. Lopez and the driver fell out of the bus during a brief struggle. He managed to get behind the driver's wheel and speed off as the officer shot in the vehicle's tires. But by the time the bus was found, about a mile down the road, Lopez had slipped into the wilderness on foot. The highly dangerous fugitive was still at large 3 weeks later when he murdered a 67-year-old grandfather and 4 of the man's grandchildren. He stole some guns from the home and fled the scene in the victim's truck, leading to a high-speed police chase. After running over spike strips, Lopez drove into a field while firing repeatedly at officers from the vehicle. He continued shooting after losing control of the truck and struck a utility pole, leaving law enforcement with no choice but to return fire. Lopez was killed in the shootout, and Texas authorities implemented changes to how it transports prisoners in response to angry demands for answers about how such a high-level inmate managed to bypass so many security measures. 3. Paraguay prison break. Paraguay is well known for being a money laundering hub and a conduit for cocaine smuggling out of neighboring Bolivia. In recent years, cartels have increasingly used the country as a waypoint along gun trafficking routes, moving tens of millions of guns from the United States to Brazil's major cities every year. Naturally, the increased trafficking has caused a major rise in violence as cartels overpower Paraguay's already weak institutions. In late 2019, Paraguayan prison officials caught wind of an escape plan among members of the powerful Brazilian First Capital Command Cartel. During the early morning hours, one day in January 2020, 75 inmates, including high-ranking cartel members, fled from the Pedro Juan Caballero prison in Asuncion, near the Brazilian border. The Pedro Juan Caballero prison has a troubled history of corruption, so authorities weren't exactly surprised to realize that crooked prison officials and guards most likely helped in the mass escape in exchange for bribes. It initially appeared as though the inmates had spent weeks digging a tunnel leading out of the prison. Investigators found cells filled with bags of dirt, which meant at the very least that there was no way that at least some staff members didn't know what was going on. Justice Minister Cecilia Perez described the unprecedented escape as the biggest breakout from a Paraguayan prison, while Interior Minister Euclides Acevedo said that the tunnel may have been a ruse to conceal staff members' complicity. He also suggested that the escapees may have walked right out the front door. Given the facility's proximity to the Brazilian border, it's likely that a large number of the fugitives had fled the country by the time authorities launched a manhunt. The prison's director was promptly fired, and at least 5 guards were suspended as officials worked to get to the bottom of the situation. Since then, Paraguayan officials have continued to struggle in their attempts to wrestle control over the country's prisons. A similar breakout happened again in 2022, and in 2023, a massive riot broke out at Tacumbo, the country's largest prison. 2. Jose Santa Cruz Londono. Jose Santa Cruz Londono, aka Chepe, was a founding member of the Colombian Cali Cartel, which began trafficking cocaine into the United States during the 1980s. The organization was a direct rival of Pablo Escobar's Medellin Cartel, and at one point, it was responsible for 80% of the cocaine being smuggled into the US. After taking down the Medellin cartel during the early 1990s, American authorities focused their sights on dismantling the Cali syndicate. Londono was arrested in 1995 on drug trafficking and murder charges, which included the killing of a journalist named Manuel de Dios Unanue in New York City. In early 1996, the 53-year-old bribed guards and officials to facilitate his escape from La Picota prison in Bogota. He walked out, got into a waiting van, and drove away. US officials had recently warned Colombian leaders that the overcrowded prisons housing powerful Cali cartel members were unsecured. And after Londono's escape, then-President Bill Clinton cut off some of America's aid to Colombia and refused to name the country as a partner in the war on drugs. This was meant to be a punishment for allegedly not doing enough in the effort to combat the drug trade. Acting on tips from informants, Colombian police tracked Londono down in Medellin, where he was trying to establish alliances with former Medellin cartel members amid a war with the rival Norte de Valle cartel. But just 2 months after his escape, the drug lord died in a shootout with law enforcement. And now for number 1. But if you want to hear even more stories, stay tuned for some extra content that you might have missed. 1. Jose Rodrigo Arechiga Gamboa. Also known as El Chino Anthrax, Jose Rodrigo Arechiga Gamboa was a drug trafficker and high-ranking hitman of the Sinaloa cartel. Known for his luxurious lifestyle, he was a founder and leader of the violent Los Anthrax enforcement gang. In December 2013, Arechiga Gamboa was arrested in the Netherlands on an international warrant out of the United States. And despite being one of the highest-ranking Sinaloa members ever prosecuted in the US, he served just 7 years in a San Diego federal prison for drug trafficking crimes before being released on house arrest in 2020. While house arrest sounds a lot nicer than actual prison, it's still considered a form of being in custody. It typically comes with strict rules, including curfews. In some cases, probationers are only allowed to leave their house for certain reasons like work and medical appointments. Many are required to wear an ankle monitor and are subject to surprise home visits and frequent check-ins with their probation officers. So, while Gamboa was no longer behind bars, he was still under tight supervision and enjoyed limited freedoms. 2 months into his house arrest, the former drug lord skipped town, sparking a widespread manhunt. Then just days later, the murdered bodies of Gamboa, his sister, and his brother-in-law were found in his sister's BMW along a dirt roadside in Culiacan. They'd been shot dead, and their bodies showed signs of torture. The trio had been abducted from Gamboa's sister's house after running out of ammo during a firefight with armed intruders. While the identities of the killers remain a mystery to this day, Gamboa's high-ranking status in the Sinaloa cartel led authorities to believe that the murders resulted from an internal conflict among other powerful members of the organization.
Number 10. Conjugal Chaos. An inmate at a German prison known only as Klaus Dieter H. was serving a 19-year sentence for a brutal murder when he killed his romantic partner during a conjugal visit in 2010. He'd started exchanging pen pal letters with the single mother 5 years earlier, and they eventually fell in love and applied for permission to have private visits. The couple told prison authorities that they wanted to stay together after the man's release. Officials approved the conjugal visits, thinking it would help keep the relationship intact during Klaus Dieter's incarceration. They allowed the pair to meet once a week for 6 hours without supervision. At the end of one of the couple's regular visits, a guard unlocked the cell they were in and walked into a scene of sheer carnage. The woman was laying on the floor, partially clothed and covered in stab wounds. Her skull was fractured, and there were strangulation marks on her neck. It was clear to the guard that she was dead. 2 knives and a nutcracker were found on the floor of the room. Inmates and their visitors were allowed to bring bags into conjugal cells without being searched, so there was an easy explanation for how the prisoner got his hands on the murder weapons. Klaus Dieter had attempted to take his own life but was rushed to the hospital and survived after undergoing emergency surgery. He would have been up for parole the following year, but he instead landed himself an even longer prison sentence. During questioning, he allegedly told investigators that he killed the woman because she broke up with him. Number 9. The Old Handshake Trick. Anyone who's been around the block once or twice knows that a handshake is one of the most tried and true methods for inconspicuously exchanging contraband. However, the trick didn't work for an inmate named Marcelo McDonald, who shook hands with a visitor who came to see him one day in 2023 at the jail in Broome County, New York. A corrections officer became suspicious that the visitor had handed something off to McDonald that he shouldn't have. When the inmate refused a body search, he was put in a cell with a special toilet that was equipped to prevent anything from being flushed away. Soon enough, a pink container filled with 7.3 grams of deadly fentanyl appeared in the toilet's catch basin. During a subsequent search of McDonald's cell, authorities found dozens of prescription pills that also appeared to have been smuggled into the prison. The incident triggered a deeper investigation into McDonald's visits, and suspects Ethan Papathemopoulos and Alexis Merrill were charged for their alleged roles in acquiring and delivering the fentanyl. Another inmate, Justice Marimberger, is accused of arranging the conspiracy through phone calls and messages on the facility's tablets. Marimberger was charged with 3 drug-related counts, 1 count of promoting contraband, and conspiracy. McDonald faces 2 counts of possession of a controlled substance, along with 1 count each of promoting contraband, conspiracy, and tampering with evidence. Number 8. Teacher gets busted. Just a few days into the 2023 new year, Sheriff A.J. Smith tasked one of his employees with monitoring inmates' video chats at the Franklin County Jail in Florida. They discovered footage of 52-year-old veteran schoolteacher Donna Barber allegedly disrobing during steamy video calls with her inmate boyfriend Lawrence Ray. Some of the videos appeared to show Barber in her office during school hours. During one conversation, Ray's ex-girlfriend entered the chat, unaware of his relationship with Barber. The dialogue quickly spun out of control, according to Smith. The sheriff used the case as a key talking point in a video he posted to social media, voicing his concerns about communication between prisoners and visitors. Smith told the New York Post that he decided to go public about Barber's case in particular because he thinks people have a right to know who's teaching their children. While there were no grounds for criminally charging the school teacher, Barber's employer told her that the school board planned to recommend her for termination after discovering that some of the conversations took place on campus. In response, Barber resigned from her position. A school source told the Post that parents and staff members had mixed reactions to the situation. Barber was a respected teacher of nearly 30 years who was nearing her retirement. Her behavior seemed out of character, and while it's automatically concerning when a teacher dates a prisoner, her conduct would have been far less of an issue if she'd kept her work and personal lives separate. However, by conducting some of the video chats at her workplace, she undeniably crossed a line. Number 7. Sophisticated snack delivery. One day in 2023, a sheriff's deputy apprehended a man who was lurking in an unauthorized area at the DeKalb County Jail in Georgia. He had a box cutter in his possession and was detained while authorities performed a wider search of the area surrounding the facility. In a bush next to the building, they found a hidden bag filled with contraband, which they believe inmates planned to hoist into the building through a broken window using a rope. The illegal care package contained marijuana, cocaine, cigarettes, cell phones, jewelry, and keys. The bag was also filled with cooked chicken wings and sweets. Authorities charged the suspect, 45-year-old Michael Anthony Dixon, with multiple drug-related felonies, including possession of marijuana and possession of cocaine with intent to distribute. He also faces one felony count of crossing the state-county guard line with weapons and misdemeanor criminal trespassing. The arrest came as part of a bigger operation called Eyes in the Sky, which began in 2022 amid a suspicious influx of contraband getting smuggled into the jail. Suspecting that people were arranging contraband drops, the facility began using drones to patrol its exterior. Multiple people have been caught and charged as a result of the ongoing effort, including both inmates and their co-conspirators on the outside. Number 6. Murderer strikes twice. Argentinian prisoner Gabriel Chirete Herrera was serving time for robbery and murder in 2006 when he fatally strangled his wife, 29-year-old Veronica Castro, during a conjugal visit. He then exited the room and calmly told his mother-in-law that he'd just killed her daughter. Herrera was consequently sentenced to life in prison for the murder. After committing such a horrific act, one might assume that Herrera's conjugal visits were revoked, but in Argentina, these meetings are a right, not a privilege, and after serving whatever disciplinary measures were imposed for the murder of his wife, he was allowed to resume conjugal visits. Not surprisingly, the inmate struck again. In 2017, 11 years after the first murder, Herrera fatally stabbed his girlfriend, 20-year-old Andrea Neri, during a visit with her and the couple's baby. He then exited the room carrying the child, who was thankfully left unharmed, and confessed to a guard about what he'd just done. The mother of Herrera's first victim told local media outlets that she'd become concerned about Andrea's safety, especially when she was pregnant. She said she warned the young woman to be careful, but unfortunately, Andrea failed to heed her advice. When questioned by the media about how the prison staff could allow history to repeat itself in such a horrifying way, prison director Cesar Rodriguez said that all prisoners have a right to private visits. Juan Manuel Urtubey, the governor of Salta province where the prison is located, said that he planned to suspend Rodriguez and the prison's governor as a result. Number 5. Child tattles on frisky parents. A little boy who accompanied his mom to go see his dad in jail became concerned when his parents disappeared during the visit. He approached a guard at the prison in Sudbury, England, and said that he couldn't find his mummy and daddy, triggering a full lockdown while staff members searched for the missing couple. They caught the duo in the middle of a steamy romp inside a visitor bathroom. And while some European countries allow prisoners to have conjugal visits, Britain isn't one of them. The inmate, who was serving a 5-year sentence for robbery, was charged with improper behavior on family visits. He was consequently banned from having visitors for 3 months, and he lost his gym privileges. He was also fined a half-week's pay from his prison job. It's not uncommon for prison guards to catch inmates and visitors going at it, or at least trying to, but sometimes these interactions go unnoticed. For example, in 2017, surveillance footage captured an inmate being intimate with a woman during what was supposed to be a supervised visit at Rikers Island in New York City. It's clear during the video that there's no guard in sight, and prison officials soon discovered that the corrections officer charged with overseeing the visit wasn't even on the floor at the time. Elias Husamaddin, the president of the NYC Correction Officer Benevolent Association, told Pix11 that the guard was responsible for over 50 inmates that day. He pointed toward the jail's chronic understaffing issues as a possible factor for why the officer walked away from the visit. The visitor was immediately banned from visiting New York prisons for a year and likely faced a lifetime ban as well. Number 4. Locked in the visiting room. During a visit with her son at Missouri's Crossroads Correctional Center in Missouri, 54-year-old Denise Rainey realized that they'd been allowed to sit and talk for an unusually long time. Her son left the small cubby-like space they were sitting in and found the larger visiting area completely empty. Visiting hours were over, and they noticed that they were locked inside the area. When Denise failed to get the attention of staff, her son said not to worry because guards would notice his absence during the next inmate count and would come get them. However, the next count time came and went, and the two were still stuck inside the visiting room. Normally, a little extra time to catch up is welcomed by inmates and visitors, but the situation became more and more concerning as the hours passed. Rainey later told Fox 4 Kansas City that she pounded on doors, banged on windows, yelled, and pushed buttons, hoping to gain the attention of the facility's staff, but with no success. She also had no access to a bathroom, giving her no choice but to wet herself when she could no longer hold it in. At 3:30 a.m., after languishing in the room for 12 hours and pushing her communication button several times, Rainey finally got through to a staff member. She said that when she told a worker she'd been trapped in the visiting area for half a day, the person on the other end laughed. To Rainey, it was no laughing matter. She told the guard that it wasn't funny, but they allegedly continued to laugh at her. Luckily, though, she and her son were removed from the room. In addition to not noticing that her son was missing during head counts, Rainey wondered how nobody noticed that she signed in for a visit and never signed out. A prison spokesperson admitted to the mistake, but insisted that the stranded pair had never tried to alert anyone. However, according to Missouri State Representative Richard Brown, it wasn't their responsibility to do so. While it's unclear what led to the mishap, Rainey was disappointed when she didn't receive an apology from the facility. Number 3. Virtual indecent exposure. To avoid any of the funny business that sometimes comes with in-prison visits, some prisons and jails require visitors to interact with inmates through a video chatting system at the facility. However, people still find ways to break the rules, and one woman decided to test the limits in 2021. 38-year-old Danielle Ferrero and an inmate at the Charlotte County Jail in Florida spent nearly an hour engaging in lewd conversation during a video call at the facility's visitation center. At some point, Ferrero allegedly began touching and exposing herself. Footage from the cell appeared to show the woman lifting her shirt multiple times and rocking back and forth on a chair in an inappropriate manner. Authorities arrested Ferrero for public exposure, landing her behind bars at the same jail where the hot and heavy conversation had occurred just days earlier. She was also charged with violation of probation or community control. Number 2. Deadly drug smuggling. Even after landing himself in prison for 11 years on a drug charge, Joshua Brown apparently failed to realize the life-ruining effects of illegal substances. He was 2 years into his sentence when he had his girlfriend, 33-year-old Rachel Dollard, sneak drugs into the Tennessee prison during a visit in 2022. Dollard hid a balloon pellet containing a half ounce of methamphetamine in her mouth and slipped it to Brown during a kiss. Brown swallowed the bag with plans to retrieve it once it came out the other end. However, the balloon leaked inside his stomach. As a result, he overdosed and died. Authorities charged Dollard with second-degree murder and introducing contraband into a penal facility. Following the arrest, the Tennessee Department of Correction announced plans to implement heightened security measures at its facilities. They also reminded the public that smuggling drugs into jail is dangerous and won't be tolerated under any circumstances. Number 1. Grandma gets caught. While undergoing a standard visitor search in mid-2022 at the DeSoto Correctional Institution in Florida, 44-year-old Melissa Webster was allegedly caught with 100 grams of cocaine and heroin. She'd brought her grandchild to the facility to see her son, but instead found herself in the custody of the local sheriff's department. In addition to the drugs that were found on Webster, a canine search of her car turned up another 1.5 pounds, 0.7 kilograms of cocaine and heroin. The drugs were stashed in various places throughout the vehicle, including inside the baby's car seat. Webster was charged with trafficking in cocaine, trafficking in heroin, introduction of contraband into a correctional facility, child abuse and neglect, and possession of drug paraphernalia. Her child was taken into the custody of the state's Department of Children and Families as a result.
Organized crime pays, but it also often leads to prison or death. What's the most regrettable thing you've ever done for money? Let us know in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.